tracing, with frame generation if you want that. And then if there's any sort of AI-based stuff that we've heard that eats into VRAM as well. I'm not sure if that's going to happen within the lifespan of this card. But anyway, in a lot of examples, it's right on the edge or insufficient with 12 gigabytes. So I think boosting up the VRAM capacity on that card would be the way to go. And I think if that card had 16 gigabytes, it would be a product we would be recommending or could recommend.
Yeah, I think it'd actually be a really great product. Just
well, the price is good now.
Yeah, it's available at the MSRP.
I think the price wouldn't be nearly as good if it did have.
That's right. Yeah, it'd be more expensive.
Yeah. So anyway, but that's the card I would pick to refresh for sure.
Yeah, I think the second card that comes to mind is that, you know, a 5080 Super, but not the 5080 Super that we're hearing is the rumored model, because the rumors are currently suggesting that the 5080 Super will be essentially the same as the 5080, so the same maxed out GB103 silicon, but with more VRAM, 24 gig instead of 16 gig, which is like fine, okay. It's obviously a better product with more VRAM. But what I would be angling for is closing the huge gap between the 5080 and 5090. The performance gap there is far too large. There's obviously room for a product there. So for me, a 5080 Super should be a cut down version of the 5090. So using the higher silicon and just making it like we've seen from those cards in the past, almost like a 5080 Ti sort of product.
So you'd still be angling for like 24 gigabytes of VRAM, but just more performance as well.
More performance. I think we won't see that product because NVIDIA are also making Pro GPUs, and there are cut down GB102s being put into Pro GPUs, like the RTX, whatever they're called. They sell for insane amounts of money, $5,000, $6,000 for cut down versions. So I would expect that that card probably won't exist, and instead that silicon will be used still for the Pro market. But that would be my ideal like 5080 Super refresh. And I think that would be like a really compelling product, and they could even, dare I say it, make it more expensive, because there's such a large gap there that they could sell a $1,200 5080 Super that was, you know, a decent amount faster than the existing 5080, more VRAM. I think that would be compelling. So there's that, and obviously, you know, will we get a 5060 Super that has fixed VRAM? I doubt it. So probably not even worth talking about that one. Okay, so this isn't a question, but it is definitely a question that we'll be answering. Please mention that AMD Frank Azor's tone-deaf 8GB and MSRP statements are unacceptable. So let me read out what Frank Azor replied to a random person, maybe it was another media outlet on Twitter/X. So out of the blue, he responds with this comment. Majority of gamers are still playing at 1080p and have no use for more than 8GB of memory. Most played games worldwide are mostly esports games. We wouldn't build it if there wasn't a market for it. If 8GB isn't right for you, then there's 16GB. Same GPU, no compromise, just memory options. So there's a lot to say here about this.
Where would you like to start with this?
I would like to start by saying, firstly, that this comment didn't need to be made at all.
Okay.
And I think this is an issue that we've seen with AMD's marketing over the years, that, you know, there's been improvements, so give them credit where it's due. But I think they have run into issues previously where they've made unnecessary statements that just muddy the waters and make people upset and annoyed. And I think this is one of those comments. This wasn't Frank coming out and making just a tweet on his own account, like an original tweet or whatever. This was a reply to someone that didn't tag him, didn't tag AMD. He must have just been browsing Twitter, saw that, and was like, that's the comment I'll respond to. Just unnecessary, stupid. I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, so I quoted that tweet. Now, the problem is we're talking about a 9060 XT, and that's the product name, but there are 8 and 16GB versions. And we can talk about that a bit more as well, because there have been, you know, popular GPUs that we've had really no issue with. RX 580, for example, there was 4 and 8GB versions of that card. Some of them, the 4GB version came first and the 8GB version came later. Some of them they released simultaneously. In those examples, at the time of release, the 4GB version, so the lower capacity version, actually represented better value, because there was basically next to no examples you could point to where the 4GB version in that example was insufficient. So it played all the games, it looked like that was going to be fine for years to come, and that was certainly the case. The 8GB was, I think all reviewers spoke to the 8GB version as being more future-proofing.
Yeah.
It was the future-proofing angle. If you wanted to spend the extra money in the hope that sometime down the track that would prove to be a better purchase, then fine. But the 4GB card worked. There were really no examples where it didn't work, and so it was fine. Fast forward today, we have 8 and 16. There are loads of examples, and they seem to be growing by the week really with every new release that comes out, where 8GB at the very least is heavily compromised. Some examples it's very broken, but it's heavily compromised, and this is at the launch of the product. Presumably you'll be keeping this thing for a minimum of 2 years. Likely, when we hear from you guys, it's like 4 or 5 years a lot of you want to keep it for. So that's a big problem because they share the same name. If there was a 9060 8GB like there is an RTX 5060 8GB, not ideal, but less of an issue. Then that just comes down to the pricing and the performance of the card and do we recommend it. But so you've got two products there, it's very misleading, and we already know the intention. The intention is to screw over consumers, essentially. So they want to, just as we talked about the 5060 Ti, they want to be able to pitch or sell these cards to system integrators, so all their partners, Dell, HP, those guys, and they can advertise that they're selling these really great value gaming systems with 9060 XTs in them. Except when you check the fine print, it's the 8GB models, not the 16GB models. So this is stuff we've again talked about at length, and Frank knows this is what they're doing. Like, they're releasing these cards to take advantage of consumers. This is essentially an anti-consumer part. If we were talking about a 16GB base model with a 32GB future-proof option, then the conversation's entirely different, because the part you're buying now works perfectly fine under all scenarios. You never have to worry about VRAM, and that is likely going to be true for the next 2, 3, 4 years. But that's not the case. So I hate it when people try to confuse the 4 and 8GB versions that we've seen previously, where the 4GB cards were perfectly fine, and now this is just the same thing. Like, why are you upset? It's not dodgy at all. But the 8GB thing's been drawn out for so long that it is in no way the same situation. And on top of that, it's not like a $200 product. It's not less than $200. It's still a $300 US product. That is a lot of money to spend on a GPU that can only play Valorant or Fortnite using specific competitive quality settings. Because I like Fortnite at competitive quality settings, that's how I recommend you should play the game. But loads of you are like, I like to turn everything up to epic because the game's beautiful and I just enjoy playing the game that way. So just because you're an esports gamer doesn't mean your keyboard's on a 45-degree angle on your desk, you've got all your binds dialed in, and you play like you're trying to go to some world championship. A lot of people like playing those games with their friends, and they just like playing it casually because they enjoy the way games like Valorant or Counter-Strike or whatever play, and they want to crank it up. I think in the case of Counter-Strike, it doesn't really matter what you crank it up to, but they play other games as well, but that's just a silly angle to take.
There's just so many poor angles to this. Like the esports thing we've talked about in the past as well. What if there's a future esport game in the next couple of years that's really popular that uses more than 8GB of VRAM? You're just closing off your options by buying the compromised product right now that we know doesn't work in some games. And on top of that, plenty of esports gamers, while they majority of the time will play the games we've been talking about, may want to dabble in the latest and greatest single player title, especially major popular releases like on the scale of like a Cyberpunk. GTA 6 will be coming up within the next few years on PC, I would imagine. So those sort of launches tend to get a very broad gaming audience playing, even people that would normally play those games. So from that perspective, it's bad. The one question I think gamers at large should be asking when it comes to this discussion is, why do the two products have the same name? And I think it goes back to things like, having options for gamers is fine. Like, we're not advocating for there suddenly to be no affordable GPUs. Like, we just want to delete the 8GB cards and have the entry point for gaming now being $350 instead of $300 or $250 or whatever the price point is.
Which is the opposite of what we've been saying, but anyway.
It's the opposite of what we've been saying, but we're not advocating that gaming should get more expensive and only have 16GB cards. Options are fine. And I think the reasons Frank has said about, some gamers may make the value call that they will know that they're only playing Valorant or whatever. They definitely don't need to spend the extra $50. All fine, have a model for those people, no problems. What you have to ask beyond that point is, so then why do they both have the same name? Why isn't the esports model, the 8GB card that you're selling directly to those markets, why isn't that called something else? And this is knowing full well that, as you've said, AIBs and a lot of retailers as well do not make it clear that the 9060 XT is coming in an 8 or 16 gig model. So in that situation, if you're a company that really wants to advertise